So on Monday, the NUF annual conference kicked off. Pardon me. For those of you who don't know what that means, that is the National Farmers Union. And they have an annual conference every year, just like all big organizations do, to set out what the problems for farmers are, what they're worried about, etc., etc. It's a big conference. These happen all the time with these, types of organizations. However, two things that are clearly on the agenda that were never really there before. First of all, Brexit. Brexit is causing huge problems in the farming industry, especially in the pig industry. The pig industry is on the brink of collapse because there are too many pigs, not enough butchers, and we are experiencing a massive hold up in that pipeline. And the main thing is, again, it was EU workers that worked in those slaughterhouses. They're not there anymore. And slaughterhouses aren't really in, shall we say, the center of the city where, where the most people who are, again, wanting jobs are. And also, working in a slaughterhouse isn't the most desirable job for people to do. So, again, the industry trying to attract people, again, in, they had all that access to the EU labour before. Well, now that's gone. Certainly one issue that is going to be talked about this week, and no doubt probably will bring up again this week, but also one of the big one now is there now new Australian rivals, a rivalry which British farming has never had to deal with for quite some significant time, and one that has a lot of farmers incredibly worried about the falling standards that could happen, and of course the giving in and pretty much rolling over that the government did on the Australian trade deal. Are the farmers going to be happy? Absolutely not. As we've said before, farmers are a key voting bloc for many Tory constituencies. And the fact that we have seen in two lost by-elections by the Tories, the farmers over there significantly made the moves over to Liberal Democrats. Could we be seeing this happen in other, shall we say, Tory shires? Is very, very likely. So, as always, on with the main show then. And of course, but before we do that, please remember to hit that like, share, and subscribe button. And of course, down below there are links to my Patreon page and a one-off donation link called Buy Me Coffee, where you can buy me coffee. And as always, thank you very much to all those people who do support the channel that way. So, on with this. This, of course, comes from The Guardian with the title of Australian rivals and Brexit barriers leave UK farmers on stony ground. Swapping their pastures for the concrete jungle, hundreds of Britain's farmers will take off their wellies this week and head to the conference centre in the central Birmingham for their annual shindig of the National Farmers Union, or the NUF. Nearly about over 1,000 food producers will meet there to discuss the blueprint for the future of British farming, up against this backdrop of one of the biggest upheavals in a generation in agriculture, following the UK's departure from the EU and, of course, the pandemic, and amid the very discussions about the future land use they face in, of course, during a climate crisis. Farmers insist that COVID only increased consumers' appetite to buy British, especially at a time when global supply chains were disrupted. But the past 2 years have also shown it's not always easy for food producers to get their own produce from field to fork. The industry is grappling with worker shortages following Brexit and COVID, and with many European workers went back to their home countries, a shortage of workers has already resulted in unpicked fruit and veg being left to rot in fields. And, of course, a culling of healthy pigs on farms because of the lack of staff at slaughterhouses, and an estimated 350,000 animals have been killed and won't enter the food chain. And all this is taking place before the farmers actually feel the full impact of the UK's post-Brexit trade deals with food-producing nations such as Australia and New Zealand, which will see their exporters theoretically be able to seed limitless amounts of lamb, beef, and dried dairy products to the UK within 15 years. And these are incredibly bitter pills to swallow for an organisation which backed staying in the EU before the Brexit vote. And again, the NUF did back Remain. Again, as I've said before, farmers were pretty much split on this during the Brexit vote. So while the focus of the conference will be on the future and life beyond the EU subsidy scheme, known as the Common Agricultural Policy, and of course worth about 3 billion a year to UK farmers, food producers are, like most other businesses, bearing the brunt of rising costs. And the most pressing concerns for most farmers are the three F's: feed, fuel, and fertilizer, all of which have rocketed up in price, leaving many wondering how much fertilizer they can afford to buy for the spring planting season. And agriculture, of course, only makes up a very small contribution to the UK's annual economic output, approximately 0.5%. Yet, it is the lifeblood of many rural communities, and inflation will be a major worry for those people living in those regions which are the heart of the government's own levelling up ambitions. The NUF president, Mini Batters, who is again seeking re-election for a third term, representing the interests of around 50,000 English and Welsh farmers, is clear on the importance of farming to ensure a domestic food supply and sustaining rural ways of life. The TV's presenter Jeremy Clarkson attempts to try and reinvent himself as a farmer, may have obviously provided TV ratings gold, and of course his Clarkson Farm series has been recommissioned for a second series. But Batters has recently told The Observer that she doubted whether the current crop of politicians actually understood the importance of agriculture. You could be forgiven for thinking that George Eustace, the Secretary of State for Environment, Food and Rural Affairs, himself a Cornish farming stock, might receive a rather frosty reception from the assembled food producers when he gave his speech at the conference in recent months. Many farmers have even criticised their apparent discontent between Eustace's resoundingly positive portrayal of the opportunities for British agriculture and the current realities of farming life. Again, not surprising, that seems to be the real disconnect here, of course. Of course, across the seasonal workers, there remains a very thorny issue. And of course, the government is keeping the number of permits at around 30,000 allowed back in 21, resisting calls of the producers for a significant increase in this quota. Industry insiders do criticise DEFRA, Eustace's department, for not having very little influence in the cabinet, and say it is the Home Office calling the shots when it comes to setting the numbers of post-Brexit visas allowed for seasonal workers. And of course, far from their fields, expect farmers this week to issue some very stark warnings about how the continued worker shortages will impact domestic food production and how far taking back control could lead to Britons eating more imported food. So, all in all, this week, expect a lot of farmers to be on TV and essentially really going after the government. Because, as I said before at the beginning, if those two recent by-elections that were again meant to be won by really safe Tory hands and almost instant wins for them, overwhelmingly, when it's looked back at those data and those polls and investigations have been done, farmers have overwhelmingly turned against the Tories. And that isn't good news for them, especially down in the blue wall seats, which is ultimately going to be targeted by the Liberal Democrats at the next election. And we will be, of course, talking about the very interesting sounds we are hearing now of a Labour Lib Dem alliance. Again, something very interesting in the work, which could bring some real change to the UK. But as always, thank you very much for watching. And of course, we'll see you all next time. So please remember to hit that like, share, and subscribe button. And of course, down below, there are links to my Patreon page and a one-off donation link called Buy Me Coffee, where you can, well, buy me coffee. And as always, thank you very much for watching. And we'll see you all